am not, okay. Now, sorry for the delay. I believe I am live streaming. I'm gonna come to that one and sure that it is. Okay, good. All right. So what we're gonna do tonight is we're gonna take a quick detour. Instead of diving right back into the to-do list app, I thought back to how I learned about data modeling, right? And I know you guys covered a lot with Gus, but I was trying to think about the issue with data modeling is there's no real right answer, right? There's a wrong answer, but there's not necessarily a right answer, which is really hard to work with. And so what the way I learned data modeling was I took it at the iSchool at SU, and my professor gave us a use case, and he said, here is this appliance repair shop, and here's a 2 or 3 page Word document of how this repair shop runs a business, right? The client comes in, there's someone at the front desk, the person at the front desk writes down their information on an index card, puts it away. Now, they also write another card out with the client's name on it and put it in the to repair folder. And then so now we have 2 different places to store the data. Okay, and now that repair technician comes in to fix the car, goes to that folder, pulls it out, works on it. Now he has to place an order for a part. So he has to go to another file cabinet, get the information about the part, and you go through this whole process, right, of how they do business now. So in addition to the ERDs that you guys learned about, there is also something called a DFD, a data flow diagram. And the idea behind that is, I think it's this one, yeah. The point of a data flow diagram isn't to actually look at the fields or think about a database. It's just to document the flow of how a business does something now. And sometimes that's really helpful to think about before you guys dive into your data modeling directly, instead of just going, okay, what fields do I need, what tables, all of that stuff. If you just look at, okay, what is the end user going to see of my app? What is the current flow? Don't even think about software. Just think what does the business currently do now, or what is this flow that I'm trying to fix? Yes, Linda, I certainly can. Thank you for the reminder. What you end up doing is making this DFD, and before anyone asks, I'm going to post all of these in a zip or a Google Drive or something. So basically, this is a DFD. There are standards behind it. This is, personally, when I learned all of this, I thought there were levels to it that you had to go so in depth that I didn't think it was worth learning. I have never in my professional career created a DFD. However, it is a good process to just start thinking about, all right, don't make this technical. What is the flow of the business? What are the requirements of the business? And so you create a DFD of what I'm echoing, I don't know why. What the business flow currently is. So you can see on the screen here, like it all starts with the customer, and the customer gives over some information and the appliance information. And that all goes to the counter clerk who creates the repair order. And some of it goes into their current card file with all the customer information. And then that repair order information goes into another folder. And then it goes off to another part of the business. So sometimes it's helpful to start with the data flow diagram. And then from there, we started getting into the ERD. What was kind of interesting, though, is we did a as-is ERD, and then what we wanted the normalized ERD to be. So the difference between a as is ERD is there's going to be some information on this customer information card file that gets duplicated when it goes over to the repair order folder, right? So what you want to do is, instead of diving into, oh, what are the normalizations, what are the table relations, what are the keys, instead of diving into all of that, sometimes it's easier to think about, all right, what are just all the fields that we're storing? And so I will show you what the ERD looks like. So the ERD is this one. So there's the service order folder, and the Word document that kind of like describes the whole business tells you all the information that they put on their service orders. And then these flows are basically just showing where the data goes, right? So it's not really a relationship, so to speak. It's more about, okay, where are they keeping this information now, and what information are they keeping where, essentially. And so you see that there's a lot of duplicated information between the service order folder and the completed service order folder. So the step after this is then to do what they call a corrected or a normalized ERD, and the relationship diagram. So when you drop down here, you start seeing how you would architect your database. And I was helping Anna with this last night, and she said, well, you know, what's the right answer? And I said, well, it depends. She had a inventory table and a products table, right? And she was trying to track the condition. And I said, well, is condition something that varies when people donate a product, right? So when they donate a product, a t-shirt, that t-shirt might come in as new, or it might come in as used, right? So at that point, some people may donate new t-shirts, some people may donate used t-shirts. So you want to put that at the inventory level, right? When people put in the items, as opposed to sometimes all products might be a set inventory. You don't take used canned goods, right? You only take new canned goods. So you have to analyze the needs of the business and go, okay, well, is everything of this product one particular condition, even though they may be giving me multiples of that product? Because if that's the case, you want to log it at the product level, right? Everything is going to be new of this kind or this product. So it's not necessarily there is a right way of structuring your database, but you really need to analyze the business needs before you can jump in and make your ERD out. So this is like the ERD fully attributed, to show you not only all the fields on the tables and the table names and then the primary keys of those tables, but this also shows you what all the foreign keys are as well, and what all the tables are that join together. And you see here we have that table in between, because this was initially a many-to-many relationship. Well, you could have multiple things in inventory. You can have multiple service orders. How do you track the fact that you may use multiple things in inventory on one service order? Well, you have to make a joiner table for that, right? You need to make a table that has the relationship in between it. So once you get to this point, now, according to the class I took in college, you make the mockups. Well, if anyone would like to get a good laugh, these are the first mockups that I ever made. Very pretty, I know, try and contain yourself. I know you're so excited by this, but you start thinking about the interface, right? And there are sometimes that you would use a table to display the information. You also want to start thinking about the nav and all the CRUD operations, right? Okay, how do I search? How do I read the information from the database? All right, well, how do I create it from the database? I personally, if I were the professor, I would have taken a point off of this, because I would go, well, how do I delete a customer? What if I don't want them in the database anymore? Well, right now, this interface has no way to delete. So you start looking at your interface and you start going, all right, well, I have all this data here. I need an ability to do the full CRUD set. I need the ability to create, which I did here. I need the ability to read, which I did through the search and displaying the data. I need the ability to update. Well, there's no way of updating this data here. So really, in this table, there should have been an edit button and a delete button. And now you've covered all the CRUD operations. I can't tell you how many times I have someone's requested a feature and I go, all right, and I dump in the feature and I forget about it. And three months later, I get an email, hey, could you go delete this in the database for me? I misspelled it, right? Or I created 2 of them by accident. And I look and I'm like, no, you delete it yourself. And I go, oh, I gave you no ability to delete it. So for me, it's super easy to go to Postgres and just find the row and hit the delete button. Not so easy for an end user to go write a SQL statement. So it's something to think about. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this with you guys. I want to clean it up a little bit because there are some steps in here that you definitely don't need. But this is the document that my professor created. And basically it says, it gives you the requirements, and the way this is presented is the way it will be presented if you work with an actual customer, right? So an actual customer isn't going to know that they need a many-to-many table, right? An actual customer is not going to know what the foreign key is and the primary key is. But what hopefully this will help you guys do, we're not going to go through the whole exercise, but it gives you the whole, a customer walks in with a broken appliance, and the counter clerk, creates that record. Okay, and where does it go from there? So I will post all of this. Hopefully that this will be an example of a more detailed DED, fully flushed out, and the ERD as well. And hopefully you guys can use that and go from there. Totally, once I post this, feel free to look it over if you have any questions about it or want to spend more time in class on it. Totally up for doing that. But I was just thinking about what resources I could provide to you. And the only thing that came to mind was, okay, well, how did I learn how to make an ERD? How did I learn to kind of assess what a customer was saying or what I want my app to do and go through all of those steps? So when I post this, guys, I just wanted to explain it to you before you were like, what the hell is this? Not a requirement to do this, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Okay, enough of that stuff. I want to code. Okay, so let me just check the audio really quick in Zoom and make sure it is using, yeah, it is using the right microphone. Sorry about the echo, Linda. What are we doing? We're doing the to-do list. So to start our to-do list, we should go to our to-do list, right? And the reason I say that is because it is very common to get in the morning, be exhausted from the day before, and go, what the hell was I doing yesterday? Right? So leaving yourself a little note. Our team does a daily stand-up, right? So we have a bot in Slack that asks us, what did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? And do you have any roadblocks or concerns? And that fires every morning at 10 a.m. And so I have gotten in the habit of, well, I ran into the problem where I wake up, it asks me at 10 a.m., what'd you do yesterday? And I go, I was productive. I know I did things, but what did I do yesterday? Fortunately, I can use my commit logs to cheat and go back into GitHub and look into the list of things and be like, oh, right, I got that done and that done. But what I've started to do is as I complete a task, I write it down, right? And we are kind of doing that with crossing it off. But it's nice to log everything that you've done. And I start thinking about what I'm going to do tomorrow before I even sign off, before the end of the day. And that way, when I get it up in the morning and the coffee still hasn't kicked in and I'm going, I can look at that list and it, you know, I'm setting my future self up for success. It sounds weird, but just things that I have run into and I know other developers run into as well. So if I remember correctly, we got our backend set up. We were connected to SQLize. We were ready to call it a night. And now what do we do?
You start your front end.
Yeah, so I think starting the front end is the right way to go. And in order to start it, I think we need to do this Bootstrap setup and then just do a quick design of our front end. I'm going to skip the wireframe and mockup steps, but that's something that if you guys were starting a new app, I would totally encourage you guys to do. So I'm going to fire up Visual Studio Code. I'm going to share the link with you guys, which I believe will be a different link from yesterday. Let's see, EB2F. Yeah, it is a different link from yesterday. So you guys can join that. Joining is optional, by the way. It is definitely not a requirement, but if you want to see the code on your screen, totally get it. That's kind of hard to see, isn't it? Well, I have next to no screen space now, but that's okay. I will live with it. I hate this TV. Okay. So we're going to get our front end set up. In order to avoid CORS issues, I'm actually going to set up my server to serve the front end, which is a pretty conventional way of doing it, right? So we could just create our index.html file, open it up on our computer, and be off and running. However, when you start thinking about it, how are other people going to get our index.html file, right? Our backend needs some front end interface for end users to use that. So I'm going to go to my files and I'm going to create a new file called index.html. And I'll do my HTML cheat in Visual Studio Code 5 and dump in all the default stuff. And we'll call the title to do. And I'm just going to throw an H1 in here of hello world. Anyone have a really strong hankering to use the templating engine, the EJX? Was it not? What did I teach? Maybe it wasn't EJX.
Yeah,
it was? It was the double bracket things, and we did a for loop, and the syntax looked really funny.
The percent sign?
The percent sign, that was it.
Oh.
Okay, no one has a strong hankering to do it. Probably better to get more experience with jQuery anyway, so we're just going to use jQuery.
So I'm sorry, it's
Yep.
telling me live share cannot be launched. Just
Drew, could you help? Were other people able to get into the live share? Okay. Yeah, once you install the extension, it should be pretty easy. You know. Okay, so now that we have our file set.
Yeah, but it shouldn't make it pop up. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so now that we have our index.html created, we need to tell Express to serve our index.html, right? We need to tell Express that, hey, we want this file to be accessible by anyone who goes to our port 8080. So I'm going to delete, I'm actually going to comment out our app.get. And how do I write, how do I tell Express to send my index.html file? Yep. First parameter. Yep. And second parameter is my rec res. And then how do I tell it to send a file? Res.send file. And I am going to do a // and I'm going to say, hey, send over my index.html. I'm going to attempt to tell it. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to go to my live share. I'm going to remember how to share a server. And I'm going to share my local host 8080 so you guys can, oh, just 8080. There we go. So if you guys go to the live share tab, you should be able to click on my local host 8080 and get that opened up. Okay, so I got this site cannot be reached. What did we forget to do? Launch the server. Let's see. A good question. I got a crash in my terminal. Because it's
indexed. It's habit, right?
Screw it. We're renaming our server file to index. I've had enough of this. All right, I fired up NodeMon and I got different errors here. So path must be absolute or specify root. So I do need in here to say __ dir name. And that is a handy Node variable that Node sets up for us. That's just going to inject the full path of the directory of where the file is currently running. So we're basically saying, hey, go get the path of where index.js is, dump that in, and then throw index.html on top of it. So now we have this lovely unhandled rejection, sequelized connection refused error. Now we have to remember that Node is not the only server we're using. We're also using sequelize. I'm sorry, we're also using Postgres through sequelize. So in order to turn on our Postgres server, we need to make sure Docker is running. So I'm going to open up Docker from my applications folder. And while that's booting, I'm going to go to my terminal and I'm going to go to Gus's handy Docker scripts. And I am going to run the Postgres start script with a / the script name .sh. And it says bad response from Docker engine. And that's because my Docker up in the menu, you see it's like still bouncing up here. That's because Docker is still booting up. Okay. Now that it's started, I'm going to rerun my script. My Postgres server is now started. I'm going to go back up to my folder and to my to-do list app. And now I'm going to do my NodeMon again. My server is started. I get all this lovely SQL stuff that came out. So now I'm going to go back to my web browser. I'm going to refresh and I get hello world. If I go to my index.html, that's my H1 that I wanted. So that means everything is working. We are serving our index file through our Express server. And again, the reason why we're doing that is we totally could just open up our index.html file and use it that way. But it's very common to serve your front end through your Node server because you want everyone to be able to access it. Okay. What's next? Yes. Sure.
When you did the Docker, when you did the start, the /start file,
Yes,
is that
yeah.
all you need to do to start Docker?
You have to start Docker on its own. So you can start Docker just by opening it from your applications folder. And that's what turns Docker on. And then once Docker is running, we have to tell Docker to go start Postgres. And that's what the /Postgres start script was.
Oh,
It's more important now than ever to stop if you're lost somewhere, because everything we're doing here is building on each other. So definitely ask questions and stop me, and we'll get it figured out.
So you started Docker, then you started your Postgres session,
Exactly. It's Postgres server.
Postgres server.
Yes.
I was trying, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. And the Postgres server is what allows us to do our SQL.
Yes. Yes.
I was trying to start the server from the Postgres file folder. So
Yes. Yeah. You have to have Docker running. It's a domino effect, right? So it's like you want your node server started, but you can't start your node server unless your Postgres server is started, but you can't start your Postgres server unless Docker is running. So it is a, okay. What's next?
We're using Bootstrap, right?
We're using Bootstrap, so let's get Bootstrap working. What's the command? Put it at the bottom. I forget. There we go. All right, so I'm going to go get Bootstrap. So I'm going to do a search for Bootstrap CDN. CDN been explained to you guys? Okay. Some very smart people looked at the internet and they said, well, it wasn't me. I'm not claiming that. So some people looked at the internet and they went, okay, well, there is a amount of physics that's happening here, right? If you're in California and you're trying to get a file from Virginia, it's going to take more time. I say Virginia, by the way, because the big data center on the East Coast is in Virginia, because that's where a lot of the transatlantic fiber lines come up. There are a couple in New York, but the people, mainly Google, looked at New York and went, wow, New York's really expensive. We should land these fiber lines somewhere else. And so there are a lot of data centers in North Virginia. The other reason for that, any guesses? Very close to the Pentagon, and a lot of internet development was done by the government. So that's another reason why a lot are in North Virginia. So they went, okay, well, we have a lot of internet users on the East Coast, and serving that from North Virginia is fine. But we also have a lot of internet users on the West Coast. And now every time that any user on the West Coast needs to go get Bootstrap, they need to go to the company server that's in North Virginia and get that information. Well, Bootstrap is the same for everyone. Everyone uses the same Bootstrap. So wouldn't it make more sense if we put copies of Bootstrap all over the world? And then when you wanted to load your Bootstrap, you still had to go to North Virginia to get to the company server, because that's where their app is hosted. But they don't have to go back to North Virginia to get that Bootstrap code. They can just go to a local server and get it from there. And so that's what a CDN is a content delivery network. The idea is that you upload your code into the CDN, and the CDN is set up all over the world as actual physical server locations. And when you upload your code to the CDN in one place, it shoots it out to all of these different servers. And so what we're doing is we're using the Bootstrap CDN, right? So when we click on this link to go to the CDN is going to be super smart and go, oh, your closest place to get this file is New York City. So we're going to go down to New York City and grab the file from there. But if you go out to California and open the CDN link, even though it looks exactly the same, there's some intelligent routing going on to go, oh, your closest host is San Francisco. So we're going to go to San Francisco and pull the file from there. there is a module coming up on infrastructure and deployment. And then you guys get me back for authentication and authorization. I don't know how I'm going to fill 4 days of authorization and authentication. So I'm also going to do a topic on DNS. DNS is all about connecting your domain name to your web host and your email and security and SSL and all of that stuff. So if we have time next week, I will throw that topic in. If not, I will do it during the authentication and authorization. And if I still don't get to it, I'll record a YouTube video and post it there. Okay, let's get our Cdn Bootstrap. So I need all of the CSS, and I'm going to put that in my head tag. And I also need all of the JavaScript. So I'm going to grab that.
It goes at the bottom, right?
Yeah, it will work in the head tag. It is more efficient to load it after the body tag. So good practice to get there. We're also going to need Jquery. So I'm going to go get Jquery. I happen to like to use Google CDN when you can. They don't host Bootstrap because Bootstrap was initially a Twitter company. They are now completely open sourced. But Google hosts any library that they happen to use a lot internally, and Jquery is one of them. So I'm going to grab Jquery. There are slight variations between 3.2 and 1, and if you talk to a front-end developer who uses Jquery extensively, they will know off the top of their head what features are built into 3 that aren't built into 2 or 1. The issue is that so many websites use Jquery that there are a lot of sites that still use version 1 of Jquery, and because there are breaking changes in version 2 and 3, they can't just swap it out. So that's why version 2 and version 1 are still available to this day. But if you're starting a new project, there's no reason to use Bootstrap 2 or 1 and not just use Bootstrap 3. It's gotten better. There are more features. It loads faster. It's more efficient, all of that stuff. So I'm going to throw that in here. Now we have our Jquery on our Bootstrap. So our site should magically look better. And it does. Okay. We now need to actually get our interface going. So what are the requirements of our front end? We need a form. We also probably need to display our to-dos. We need the ability to display the due date on our to-dos. We need the ability to complete a to-do, maybe edit a to-do and delete a to-do, and the form to create it, right? So start thinking about the CRUD of it, but not just all the create, read, update, delete operations, but also all the data that we need for those create, read, update, delete, because it's not just about updating it to say it's completed. We also might want to be able to update the name of that to do. So we have to start thinking about, well, how does that display in the interface? We're not, because this is focused on the backend session, we're not going to design the most beautiful to-do app ever. We are going to focus more on the CRUD operations of it. So if you go, well, that looks hideous, it probably is, and there are more efficient ways of doing it. But I want to make sure that by the end of this class that we've wrapped up this to do and we've moved on to sales and MVC and all of that good stuff. So if you have a suggestion on the UI, it's a good thing to voice it, but we probably won't be implementing it. Fair warning. So let's get started. So I'm going to do a div class container. Good rule of thumb to put all of your Bootstrap code into a container because that's what makes the grid system work. We're going to get started with a form. And I'm going to pop open my Bootstrap documentation. And I'm going to search for their forms. Thank you. Okay, so their form has nothing on the top tag, but then they do a div class form group. And that's where they start putting in some data. So I'm going to grab that whole block of code, gonna dump it in here, copy and paste as your friend. Our first label is going to be name, and our second, and now we need a label input to put that in. So we're going to say name, and we're going to delete out that type because we don't, it's not an email. Form control is another Bootstrap class that's going to just automatically make it pretty for us. The ID is going to be name. We don't need the area. The placeholder is going to, we're just going to take out the placeholder. We don't need it. We're going to save that, and we're going to make sure it looks right. All right. Name field, that's fine. It's kind of taking up a lot of space. We don't really need it full width. I'd like to also fit our to-do in there. So we're going to use the grid system. Now we could get fancy with our CSS and do width 50% and float it left, or we could use Flexbox and get confused by columns and rows and text alignment. Or we could do every front-end designer's dream who doesn't have to maintain the code. We can just do a div class, and we're going to do a col md6. And actually, no, we're using Bootstrap 4. We're just going to do a column. And because the Bootstrap grid system is built on top of Flexbox, if we just do a bunch of columns, it goes, oh, you just want evenly spaced columns. Sure, no problem. I can do that. So the more columns you add, I'll just space them out evenly. It's lovely. Now you might notice my indentation is horrible right now. That drives me crazy. And it is actually harder to debug this code because my indentation is not right. So I could go in here and spend the time to fix it, or I could run Prettier. Prettier is what they call an opinionated code formatter. So they format the code to their style guides. What it does for you is automatically does the indentation, because it turns out the computer is better at fixing indentation than humans are. So why not just use that to fix your indentation? So there are ways of setting up Visual Studio Code to do a format on save. You can also go to something, fix format, indentation. Oh, come on. There is something buried in the menu here for your indentation. Really?
If you right click on, it'll say format the document.
Format document. So on my computer, it's Option Shift F. I believe that's the default. And that will automatically fix your indentation. I highly recommend setting it up to format on save. It's actually changed the way that I write my code, because I'll write code that's like this long, right? But I don't worry about hitting enter. I don't worry about my parentheses or my curly braces or whatever. And when it gets too long for me to even read it, or I'm like, what am I typing? I hit the save button, and it takes that one super long line and just goes boom, 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 boom. And all of a sudden I can read my code. So indentation is super important. You will get laughed out of a workplace if you ever submit code that is not properly indented. And the reasoning behind that is because it is actually, when you've been writing code for years, your brain just cannot read code that's not properly formatted. And when I am teaching beginner developers, not you guys, but like actually at the beginning of the program, I'll go to help someone and I'll just be like, I can't read your code. It might be running, it might be great, but someone will be like, oh, can you explain what this is doing? And I'm like, no, my brain cannot process that. So code indentation, super important.
I have a question.
Sure.
Bootstrap, is Bootstrap, Is Bootstrap something that you can use in production?
100%.
I thought it was like cheating or something.
For a long time, the New York Times was still built on Bootstrap. All of Twitter is built on Bootstrap. All of my company's apps that are in production are built on Bootstrap. It is an open source license. So it's like asking, well, can I use Node in production, or can I use Angular or React in production? I call it cheating because it makes it look so easy and I don't have to write any CSS. I cannot stand CSS. However, I know a lot of front-end developers who can't stand writing back-end code and just want to stay in CSS land all day, which is completely fine, to each their own. But I use Bootstrap because it makes my life easier. They will probably look at Bootstrap and go, well, that looks so off the shelf. And my response to that is like, right, but would you rather it be the default HTML styling, or even worse, attempt me to make something that looks like Bootstrap and is going to just look god awful? And so Bootstrap is definitely used in production. When it is used in production, it tends to be customized, so people will not make the button that default blue color, or they might change the font, or they might, you know, whatever they end up doing. But there are, I would say, maybe 50% of the sites on the web are built using Bootstrap or Foundation, which is the competitor to Bootstrap.
Sorry, question.
Yeah.
Are there like purists, like, I don't use Bootstrap?
100%.
HTML, CSS, get your step your game up.
Yeah, it's those are the same people who go, well, Bootstrap 6,000 lines of code and my CSS is only 300, so it's gonna load so much faster. And I go, really? Okay, go ahead and open up Chrome and tell me how much faster that's gonna. See, it renders a whole 3 milliseconds faster. Right? Like, think about how many sites use Bootstrap. Chrome has, every browser has gone in and made it so their browser renders Bootstrap faster. And these people who build Bootstrap work with the browsers directly to make it faster, or to look at the code and go, oh, look, we can take out these 3 lines of code, or hey, we've noticed there's a rendering issue with this, can you process this faster? So Bootstrap is the biggest framework, the biggest framework on the web in terms of popularity. There are purists out there, and there are some use cases. If you're on dial-up internet, Bootstrap may not be the right solution for you. And you laugh, but there are parts of the Midwest where even DSL is not available. So there are parts of this country, like I think that it's like 3 or 4% of the population of the US is still on dial-up.
I just did a story of this. The town of Groton, a lot of people don't have internet there, so they go to their library because that's the only place in town that has internet.
Yep.
Where Groton, which is down there, they just don't have it.
Yeah. So we laugh and we go, haha, dial up, but it is still a thing. So 9 times out of 10, if you run into a Bootstrap purist, you can, or an anti-Bootstrap purist, you can spout off things to combat them. But there are some extremely limited use cases where you would not want to use Bootstrap. Sometimes you need to develop something that will run on like a barcode scanner, and that barcode scanner isn't even connected to the internet, but you need to build out an interface for that. So it can process a couple hundred lines of CSS. It can't process a couple thousand lines of CSS. So that would be a limitation of, hey, there's this very limited, not a ton of RAM, not a ton of CPU device that needs to show this interface. That would be a time that you wouldn't want to use Bootstrap. Or people go, well, if I'm doing a completely custom site and I'm writing thousands of lines of CSS to overwrite this Bootstrap CSS, then shouldn't I just do it all from scratch on my own? And that's becoming more of a valid argument with CSS Grid, which is the, I don't want to say the successor to Flexbox, but it's the next big thing in CSS. a lot of front-end designers and developers will choose to use Foundation over Bootstrap for that very reason. Foundation doesn't give you a ton of styled components. They give you the very bare bones and make it easy to customize on top of that, as opposed to Bootstrap, which gives you more styled components and then lets you override that styling. So yeah, Jeff Passetti has a very different opinion on Bootstrap than my opinion of Bootstrap. But I know I took an intro to web design class. I had Jeff as a professor, but I also took a class before him and teaching the very basics of HTML. And I went to the instructor and I said, hey, can I use Bootstrap on my final project? And he was like, yeah, sure, I don't care. Just make sure you don't get the other students started on it. So yeah, everyone has their own opinion of Bootstrap. I'm of the camp that you might as well use it. It's a tool that's out there. It doesn't have a major impact on your website. Just go ahead and get started with it. But
Thank you.
sorry for the tangent. Danger of asking me questions is I tend to go on them. I'm going to copy and paste my code, and I'm going to do a label for my, I'm going to call it task. And I'm going to make sure to change my for tag and my ID tag. Why do we need an ID on our input? There are two reasons. Right, so we need the ability to, in our JavaScript, say, hey, go get that thing up in our HTML code, in our DOM, right, in our document object model, and I want to get the contents of that out. So that's one reason we use the ID. The other reason we use the ID is because we are good boys and girls that are using proper HTML5, and that HTML5 uses this for tag. And that for tag also uses the ID. And the reason we do that is if we go look, one, we have this beautiful form now that has columns, isn't taking up the whole screen. But when we actually click on task up here, you notice it fills in the, it puts our cursor in that input field for us.
Wasn't that part of the accessibility as well?
It is part of the accessibility. It ties the two together. So if someone is using voice control to interact with your website and they say, click on the task field, that for and ID is going to link together because your ID might be something longer for JavaScript reasons, but the accessibility will tie the two together. If we were being really good, we would have area tags, ARIA, that would help screen readers out. But for now, we're gonna just run with this. Okay, so we have our name, and our name is actually gonna be like where we type in a username, and we have our task. What else do we need? Submit button. So I'm gonna go back to Bootstrap, and I'm going to grab our submit button. And I am going to do that as another row. So I'm going to pay attention. Because my indentation is right, I can follow this line all the way down and see where my row ends. So I can do another div class equals row. General rule of thumb with Bootstrap is you should never put something in a row that's not in a column. So it's generally considered best practice to do a row and a column. Bootstrap 4 has helped a lot with that, so it isn't quite as bad if you don't do it, but it's still a good practice, even if it's the only column in that row. So I'm going to refresh, and I have my submit button, but we're gonna make it a little prettier. So we are going to do a text center on this, and you may ask, well, text center, how come we haven't done that before? Because it's a Bootstrap thing. Okay, what's next?
Due date and.
Yeah, so we have to display our tasks. So the way I like to do that, there are some people that would jump to the back end right now, right? And they would go, all right, well, I don't want to display that until I have the back end and that data coming in. That's a fine way to do it. The way I like to do it is get my front end completely done and completely functional with dummy data. And then it's much easier to go back into my back end and start going, oh, well, that's still dummy data. Let me take that out and put in some real data and design my endpoints as I go there. So I'm going to come outside of my form. I'm going to do another div class row. And I'm going to think a table is the way to go here, right? So let's think about, we need to display the user that posted that to-do. We need to post the name of the to-do. We need to post maybe an edit button and a delete button. And then we also need a way to mark as completed.
So you know you have like the name and the task. Should you have like another input box for like the due date first? Like when you make the task, you make a due date.
Sure.
Is that what you meant, Eva?
Yeah, so that when you're, like,
Yeah.
you're putting in your task, there should be a box with it.
So in that
Sorry.
one row with name and task, we put
Right.
another one with date, due date.
Totally misread you there. My bad.
Okay.
Sorry to jump.
No, that is a good question to ask. I'm totally not dreading finding a jQuery based date picker and putting that
Oops, we're avoiding it.
Oh, that makes sense.
in. So Bootstrap. Oh, you know, I wonder. No, so date pickers are kind of the bane of everyone's existence because HTML5 refuses to do a good date picker built into the HTML5 standard. The reason for that is they left it up to the browsers to implement their own date pickers. And so I know you guys will find this shocking, but Chrome has done a great job of adding a date picker. Guess who is not? Internet Explorer and all the internet and all the Microsoft browsers. So the issue is you go in and what you initially might do is you go, okay, I want to put in my, let's say due date. It's important to specify what kind of date you want to put in here. And I'll call it due date and I'll do my ID of due date. And then it should be the last thing posted in Slack. We have our due date and we have types, right? We've used types before. We've used type number or type email, and that does some magical things for us, right? Like it makes sure the email they input is valid, or make sure it gives them a little click up and down for a number tag. So we go in here and we go, oh, we want a type of date. And we go back to our browser and we refresh and we go, oh, that's nice. They put in a little month, day, year. And I can click on that and I get a nice little table. And you go, okay, Max, well, if it looks fine there, why don't we just use that? Well, if we use HTML5 standards, that would be completely fine. And if we go to Firefox and install updates, because when can you open Firefox and not install updates? I'm going to go to localhost 8080 and it looks a little different, but that's okay. And I'm going to click in here and I go, oh, well, that looks a little different, but you know what? That doesn't look bad. The user can go in there and use all of that stuff. So we're going to close that and we're going to go to Safari. Now, last time I used Safari, I hope that this is still the same. So now our due date has no month, day, year. So the end user is going to look at that and be like, well, how do you want me to type in a due date? And we're going to click in that field and there's no calendar pop up. So we could go write some custom code to fix this in Safari, or we can say, screw you, HTML5, you let me down, and go use a plugin. That's what most developers end up doing. So because we're using jQuery, there is an additional library called jQuery user interface where people got together and they said, hey, there are all of these things that we have to build over and over again, just like the Bootstrap team did, and just like jQuery did, right? We're sick of writing these things over and over again. It's so verbose. Let's come out with a library. So the same people who made jQuery said, well, we would like to do that for user UI components. And so that's what they did. So they came out with a bunch of things where you can click there and get a nice pop-up. But if we go to Safari, and go to that page and click in here, you notice we get the same exact pop-up. And while that may not seem like a big deal, when you think about supporting your app, how many people are going to call you or email you and go, I can't create a new to-do. And you go, okay, why can't you create a new to-do? Well, you can't tell an end user to open up the console and see that there's a JavaScript there, right? Like, trust me, I've tried. It doesn't work particularly well. You go, okay, well, what are you trying to do? Talk me through it. And they go, okay, well, I'm typing in my name and my to-do, and I hit the create button, and it said wrong date or date empty. And so I clicked in my date, and I typed in 6-2-1, and I hit create. You go, 1? You mean 2001? You mean, right? Or I just typed in 6-1. Okay, well, the computer needs to know a year because we're using JavaScript dates to store that information. So the bad UX answer would be just store it as a string, throw it in the database, store it as a string. But then you run into, well, I want to add some more functions to my to-do list app down the road. I'd like to send a reminder email that they need that completion, that task completed. So now you write your reminder email, it goes in, it goes, hey, show me all the tasks that need to be completed today. And it goes, well, I tried to look at 6-1. I have no idea what 6-1 is. I think that's 6-1 1985 because 1976. There's a standard for like what the year defaults to. And so now you run into all issues there. So the right answer is deal with it now, store it properly as a date, and use that date picker now. So I am hoping that they. Okay, so we are just going to do due dates as dates. We're not going to worry about the time that you want to get it completed. We'll just do a standard date for this. So I am going to grab the script tag for Jquery UI. That's weird, sorry. And I'm gonna throw that down in the bottom of my code. And I also need to not just grab the JavaScript code, I also need to grab my CSS code for Jquery UI. Jquery UI requires Jquery to work, but is a completely separate library from Jquery itself. Now, if we were truly being fancy, we could install this using npm. But that's another side tangent, and I'm not going to go down the pros and cons of that quite yet. So what I'm going to do is they tell me to just do an input type text with the ID of date picker, and then we use Jquery here to attach the Jquery UI date picker library to that ID itself. So I'm going to go back to my code. I'm going to make sure I have my due date here, ID due date, and I'm going to say type is text. And I'm going to go back to my browser. I'm going to refresh it. And now it's just a basic text input. So all we've done is we pulled in the JavaScript for Jquery UI. We pulled in the CSS for Jquery UI. Now we actually need to write the Jquery to attach the UI date picker component onto our due date field. So to do that, we just need this nice little code here. So I'm going to go down to the bottom. I'm going to open up a script tag here, and I'm going to write a little code that might look weird. So Yeah, I know it looks weird. This is basically syntax that says don't run this code until jQuery has loaded, right? Because when your page first loads, the browser is going to look at it and be like, oh, JavaScript, I get to run some JavaScript. But when it runs the JavaScript, it may not have taken the time to go out onto the internet, get the jQuery from the CDN, pull it back in, and then go out to the internet, pull in the jQuery UI JavaScript and pull that in. So if we don't use this syntax here, what it's basically going to do is execute our JavaScript before jQuery is loaded in and ready to go. So what this shorthand does, it's the equivalent of a document.ready if you guys ever dive into JavaScript a little bit more, but it basically says, hey, wait until jQuery is loaded before you execute this code. So now that we've done that, we can use our $, which is saying, hey, go use jQuery. And instead of doing #date picker, I gave it an ID of due date. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to put that in there. I'm going to save it. I'm going to refresh it. And I'm going to pray that this works. Yay! Okay, so now that when we click on a due date, you notice it enforces that format for us. And we can go back, we can pick a different due date. Everything works very nicely. And if we even go in here and want to type in a different due date, you notice it changes it for us in that calendar. So when we hit enter, click out, go back in, that is also selected. Okay.
That wasn't so bad.
And that works across all the browsers?
Yeah, and to prove it, we're going to go over to Safari because it wasn't working there before when we just did the basic HTML date, and we'll click in and it works. It wasn't so bad, but it was worth covering because I promise you at some point in your professional development careers, you will have to work with dates. And to back me up, Drew, would you like to comment on any time you've had to work with dates in the browser?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Time zones even.
We're not doing time zone support. I'm putting my foot down. I can't tell you how many people have told us, like, I set a due date of midnight, but I got the email at 4 a.m. Oh, well, they're on West Coast and the app is in East Coast. So how do you handle that? Not easily is the answer. All right, great. So now we have our name, our task, our due date. We have our form set up. Let's make a basic table to show the tasks that have been created, right? So we're going to go back up to our HTML code. We're taking a break after this, by the way. So something to look forward to. I know it's unbearable to listen to me for hours on end. Okay, so we are going to go to our Bootstrap code, and we are going to jump to the tables, which is under the content section. And they have a pretty nice looking table for us. So instead of copying this directly, because there's a lot of code and we don't want to delete it all out, I am going to do this part by hand. So I'm going to try and split my screen here. And so what I'm going to do, yeah, I'll leave it in the row and column just in case we want to get fancy down the road. So we are going to do a table, and our table has a class of table. And our table is going to have a table head, and our table head is going to have a table row. And our table row is going to have a column, a TD, table data. The crazy people who made HTML were thinking of things, by the way. So if you go, oh, what was that tag called? TR is for table row, TD is for table data, which is essentially the equivalent of a column, right? Except I'm not going to use a TD, I'm going to use a TH. And the reason I want to use a TH is because that's the table head, right? So you only use TH tags usually in the table head section. So we need the task. We need the creator of that task. We need the due date. We need the I'm gonna leave this here for now. We might refactor it down the road, but maybe the completion time. We need the ability to edit. The edit, well, we'll just leave it as edit. And we also need the ability to delete. Anything else that we need?
Date entered.
Date entered is going to be computer generated, but that's a good thing to bring up. There is something that we're missing.
Check.
Completed.
Yeah.
So what we're actually going to do is we're going to make it so when you click on the task itself, it's going to complete it. It's going to mark it as completed.
It's gonna ask you, mark is complete.
It's going to be a hyperlink. So when you click on it, and when you click on it again, we're going to make it so it marks it as uncompleted.
Okay.
So we're going to make it toggleable.
I was thinking of snooze.
You're getting fancy. We
But realistic.
realistic, yes. And if we were building a full to-do list app, but we're thinking MVP, right? Is we can always add in snooze later. We can add that. Let's focus on getting this up and running and then go from there. Okay, so now that we've created our table head, before I go too far, I want to test it. I want to make sure that it shows up. Okay, this is bothering even me as a non-front end person. We should probably put a little margin top between the table and the form. So let's do that. Let's throw in 20 pixels. And you know what? This probably shouldn't be at the very top. So I'm gonna get fancy and I'm gonna look up, Bootstrap has a card, and the card is just this nice kind of container. And so I believe all I need to do is wrap the form in a class called card. And I'm also going to do a style margin top of 20 pixels on that. And I'm going to refresh that code. That looks a little better. This is still a little tight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a div in here of card body, which again is in the documentation, not just pulling this out of thin air. And I'm going to refresh. That adds a little padding for us. And then that submit button is going to bother me as well. So we're going to go down. And the reason that doesn't have the padding on it is because I did the card body on this row, but that row is only these 3 columns, right? It's not containing that actual submit button. So I should really take this out and do another div class equals card body. And then I'm going to move my div tag down to here and refresh. And now that looks not horrendous. Okay, one more thing we're going to do. We're going to put in some dummy data and just make sure that our table looks good. And then we are going to, before we break, figure out what the next step is. So when we come back from our break, we know what we are working on. I know it sounds like I'm babying you guys, but it is a real world issue. So we are going to come down here. We're going to come out of our table head. And because our indentation is right, it's very easy to see where our table head ends. And we are going to create our table body. And we're going to go back to our Bootstrap and look at a table and make sure there's no class on our table body, which there is not. So we jump right into the table row. So we're going to do a table row, and then we're going to do a table data. And now we're just going to line it up, right? So our first task is finish the to-do app. And the creator is CIC students. Will not let me capitalize. There we go. The to-do date is going to be 6/25/19. The completion time is just going to be empty, right? Because we're not completed it yet. So we'll just do an empty TD there for now. And our edit and delete, instead of making them links, we should probably make them buttons, right? Start thinking about this as an interface and not just getting it out there. So I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to steal some code from Bootstrap, and I'm going to use an edit button. And then I'm going to get fancy and use this danger button because we're deleting things. There are studies actually done on the impact of red in user interfaces and how people are more careful around red buttons than they are around just delete links. So instead of calling it danger, we're just going to call it delete. And we're going to refresh. Don't hate it. My resolution's horrible. Once we open this up on a full screen, that doesn't look too bad. I challenge people all the time when they are Bootstrap purists and they go, no, I want to write, I want to do it all myself. I go, okay, let's create this, right? You sit down, you can write all the custom CSS you want. Go ahead. And they go out and they start doing it, and I go, all right, I'm finished. And they go, oh, I'm halfway done, right? And then they finally finish, and I go, okay, how's yours look on a mobile phone? And they go, what do you mean, how's mine look on a mobile phone? And I pull this over, and I go, this doesn't look horrible on a mobile phone. And within 30 seconds, I can add a couple classes to my code that's going to make this fully responsive, right? And I can go in here and go, okay, instead of just a col, I'm going to make that a col MD. And I'm going to make all three of these col MDs, right? So I'm literally adding 9 characters to my code, and I'm going to hit refresh, and all of a sudden that wraps. But when I pull this out, right now, how many lines of a media query do you need to write to make that happen? You know, and how do you make it so it's not just the media query to make the 3 line up, but it's also, notice it gets full width, the text field. So you're not just writing a media query on that column, you're also writing a media query to make the text field happen, you know, go full width. So personally, huge Bootstrap fan. There are definitely reasons not to use it, but you will be hard pressed to make an interface like this in the 45 minutes we've been working on the front end without something like Bootstrap. Okay. What do we need to do before we go on break?
Figure out what's next.
Figure out what's next. But before we figure out what's next, cross it off. All right, so we have a form on the front end to input items. So we are going to cross that off. But we also did the Bootstrap setup and design. So we're also going to cross that off. Okay, and we also, well, we kind of have this done, but it's not completely there yet. So we also use a third-party library to input dates. We completed 3 tasks. Okay, so looking at this list, not only are we good, we're 50% done. So it's important to look not at individual tasks and what we're completing, but the overall thing, and realize that, hey, we're moving towards the end goal here. Okay, what is the thing that we are doing after break, other than regretting drinking coffee at 7 o'clock? Yeah, so I would say before we can use JavaScript to display the new items added to the server, we need to connect our front end to the back end, which are very closely related. We're probably going to accomplish both of them at the same time. And connecting the front end to the back end, we also need to make our endpoints, right? It's not like we just have this magical back end where we can just connect to that and go. Which does exist, by the way, but it was not on the curriculum, so we're not covering it. you're smiling. Do you know what it is, Drew? What I'm talking about?
No, I don't.
So Firebase is something, yeah, it was very vague. There were a lot of front-end designers at Google that went, hey, you know what? I just need a basic backend, and I should be able to use this standard and just create new things on my front end and not have to worry about setting up a node server and connecting it to the database. And so Firebase came out as kind of a front-end web developer's paradise where they could get back-end functionality without having to set up an entire back-end.
Sorry.
However, there are limitations of it. There are very few jobs that are looking to hire a full stack developer who only has Firebase experience and does not understand a full backend flow. So the reason why we are not covering it is because it is important to learn these backend skills and have a basis in SQL and know how ORMs work and spinning up the servers and all of that fun stuff. However, for small projects, Firebase is definitely something to consider. It's actually all of the reasons I listed above are the same reasons we're not diving into Meteor and again focusing on getting a full app up and running. Meteor is a great tool to use. I would highly encourage you guys to use it at something like Hack Upstate, or even if you want to do your own little side project, Meteor is a great project to learn. The other great thing about Meteor is the documentation is pretty clear. And so it's good to practice learning something new without that instructor nearby, because you can be pretty much guaranteed that you will, when you get on the job, they will go, oh, we use library apps. We use Angular, right? And you go, well, I know React. And so they'll go, oh yeah, that's pretty much the same thing, we'll hire you. Because they know you have those skills, but you might not have all the specifics or the syntax or the little nuances of that skill. So it is important to practice learning on your own, going out, finding new projects, going to OpenHack, hearing people talk about it, and then going out and trying to learn on your own. So Firebase is one of them that I would put in that camp. Meteor is another. But for now, we're going to continue moving on. We are going to focus on connecting the front end to the back end and setting up our API endpoints when we get back. So I am going to leave that highlighted on the screen. So when we do get back, we know what we're doing. 7:10, take a 15-minute break and be back at 7:25-ish.
Bootstrap server
All right, guys, let's dive back in and get started here. Okay. So what did we say we were going to do? Connect the API. Great. So the place to start is normally creation, right? In order to see if something's going into the database, we need the ability to create the task in. So I'm going to go to my front end, and I'm going to go down to my script code, and I am going to say, hey, get the where am I? The form. I'm going to put an ID on my form that says new task. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say, hey, when new task is submitted, dot submit, that doesn't seem right. Let's do it on the button instead. Oh, that's what I'm doing. Oh, how do I want to do this? I'm going to do it like this. I changed my mind. Sorry. I'm going to do on submit. We'll call it new task. And then in here, we are going to do a const new task, which takes an event and does something. So our event, we want to prevent default. And what prevent default does is it tells the browser, don't refresh the page, don't try and load a new page, don't go anywhere else. I'm handling this. You don't have to do anything. And then we are going to console log new task. And the reason why we do this is because I forget how to connect the form to my front end JavaScript all the time. And so before we get too far advanced and start adding complexity to it, setting up our API calls, getting the database involved, we want to just make sure that this is working. So we're going to go back to our front end. We're going to refresh. We are going to open up our browser console and blow it up so you guys can see it. And when we click submit, it refreshes the page and does something weird here, right? So we know something isn't working. So let's go here. Const new task. I'm wondering.
Is it that prevent default thing?
I don't think it's the prevent default. I think that maybe it's because I have it on my Jquery on document ready. So let's try and move it outside of that and refresh and submit, and we still have the same thing going on. So I'm wondering if it's because I use the const, and the const is going to enforce the scope. So basically new task might not be accessible outside of my script tag. So let's try and do it the old school way of just defining a function. No, I'm good, thank you. So let's use a little bit older syntax and see if that fixes it. No, well, that wasn't it either. New task, let's check new task on submit. Is it a capital S?
What's supposed to happen when you hit that submit button?
It's supposed to console log something out.
Oh, okay. We're just testing it to see if it works.
Correct. And it isn't, so we're going to look up on submit JavaScript. And look at our on submit event. I was right that it's a lowercase s, which is a mistake I've made before. Oh, you know what it is? I forgot the parentheses. So if we put our parentheses on here and we go down here and we refresh and click submit, cannot read prevent default of event because I need to also pass in the event that it should be passing.
Why Why is it flickering like that?
Because it's actually submitting the form, and the default submit is to refresh the page. JavaScript prevent default. No, they want it called event, not just EVT. There we go.
There it is.
Little debugging, a little Stack Overflow goes a long way. And now we have it working, right? So our new task is showing up. Now, if we didn't do that debugging now, there are times where I'm like, I've been doing this for years. I know what I'm doing. And I go in and I submit, I get my front end all working, and then I write the fetch call out, and then I go write my backend code, and then I connect it to the database, and then I go and run it, and it just doesn't work. And then you have to backstep all of your backtrace all of your steps. So it's good to test. It's good to figure things out. So now we know that this JavaScript code is running when our task is submitted. So before I write my fetch request to the API, I also need to get the name, the task, and the due date that was inputted to these fields, right? So I'm going to use Jquery to do that, and I'm going to say const name equals $ quote. And I'm going to do $name, and I'm going to get the value from that field. And what that's going to do is say, hey, go look at the ID name. So we scroll up, we look at our ID on the input class name. And now we want to say, hey, go get the value, what's actually typed into that, and store it in this JavaScript called name. We're also going to do that with our task. And we're also going to do that with the due date. And then I'm just going to console log out my name, task, and due date. Little shortcut for you, console log takes comma separated parameters. So if you want to log out multiple things in the console log, you can also do that. I'm going to delete out that. I'm going to do 1, 2, and put in a due date and hit submit. And we have 1, 2, and our due date come out. So now we know our front end is able to go retrieve those values. Now we need to make a fetch. Where are we fetching to? Not our database, our API endpoints in Node. So what API endpoint in Node? We haven't created one, so let's go create one, right? So we are going to app.put. Okay, to be completely fair, I would actually, so posting is normally for creating new things, and putting is normally for editing, like saving or updating. So I think we're actually going to do a post instead of a put, but a put would also be acceptable. And what do we want to call this? Sure. And what's our new task take? Yep. And I always res.send before I forget. And what we're sending back doesn't really matter at this point. We just want to res.send before we forget, because otherwise, if we make a fetch request to this API endpoint, it's going to run forever, and eventually the browser is going to get cranky and time out. And the reason for that is the server could create that in the database and be happy and think it's done. But until the server responds in that response with a send, the front end is just going to continually wait for that response. So what do we need to do in our new task?
Aren't you adding it
We need to put it in the front end, but where are we putting it?
in the database?
In the database. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our models, and our models are defined up here, and that's using a require. So that's going to our models file. So if we go back to our models file, we see all this stuff, and we're looking at the return, right? Because the require is looking at the things that are returned from the module.exports. And we have this thing called to do. And to do has a name, a created at, a completion time, a due time, and the user ID. So we'll get into user ID in a second. Right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this out, and I'm going to say username, and I'm going to make that a sequelize.string just for now. And then I'm also going to take out my force true here. I'm going to just comment that out because we don't want the database resetting every single time that we save our code. And I'm also probably going to fix, I'm going to put that back in, and I'm going to fix the spelling on completion. Wow, that was so bad. Even spell check didn't know how to spell it. Completion. Oh, I got it right this time.
So wait a minute, why do you need name and username?
So right now, our interface is taking name as a typed in name, right? So I'm going to type my name in here.
Right.
Before, we said user ID is an integer.
Oh, okay.
So right now, we're just going to store name, and we're not going to use this user table. And then down the road, we'll figure out how to implement that.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to comment out my force true. And before we do that, I'm just going to do a quick look in my P-SQL application. And what this is going to do is it's going to let me check out my table and make sure that it's set up right. So I'm going to look in here, and I have completion time spelled right. I now have username instead. And so I know that this is ready to go, and it's ready to accept information. So we are going to go back to our code. And in our new task, we're going to say models.task. And why are we doing task? Because that's not the right thing to type. We're going to do to do. And the reason why it's a to do is because it is called to do here, right? Now, this is the table name. So if you wanted to get crazy and have the table name be something different than the model name, you could do that and it would work just fine. But it is convention that your model name shares the same name as the table name. And that is such a convention that in some other ORMs that, like Sequelize, they just enforce that. The model name and the table name are exactly the same. Okay, so we're going to go to our to-do. And what do we want to do with the to-do? We want to add, what's another word for add?
Create.
We want to create a new to-do. Wow, so smart. All right. What information do we want to create in that to-do? Well, we want to create the name, the created at, and the completion time, and the username. So I'm just going to copy all of these as a placeholder. And the only thing we're not going to do is the, well, let's see. So our name of the task, let's go back, is going to be rec.body.name. And the reason why we're putting that in the body, excuse me, is because we're sending that in from the JSON, right? And because we're doing a post request, we're going to send that in using the fetch the body element. And so because we have body parser set up, we can send in some JSON, have access to the rec.body. The created at, we don't want the user to send in the time that it was created. We want to just default it to the server time. So we're going to say new date. The completion time, when you create a new task, it's not going to be completed, right? So we're just going to delete that. We're not going to use that now. And what that's going to do is it's going to set it to null. It's going to set it to empty in the database. which is good. That's what we want. There is no completion time. The due date, we are going to set to rec.body.due time. And the username, we are going to set to rec.body.username.
Do you want that space between new and date?
Yes. And that's raw JavaScript. That's how you get the current time out of JavaScript is use new date, excuse me. Have you guys covered async and await? Okay, beautiful. So I don't have to explain that.
But if you
That
want
might not
to,
be
Wouldn't hurt.
give it a little tap.
Back in the day, Node.js was created, right? And Node was created because it turned out that JavaScript was a really good language for doing things asynchronously, right? So the idea was that you could have multiple things running at the same time. And so there has been an evolution of how we manage asynchronous code. And as JavaScript got better, it got easier and easier to do that. So it used to be based off of promises, and you would see a lot of .then, .catch. And it got really complicated because you would have, okay, well, go run this promise. And then in that promise, once that's finished, go run this code. But then maybe in that code, we're going to kick off 2 more things. And all of a sudden, your code is indented like 9 different levels in because you're trying to do all this asynchronous code and trying to figure out, okay, wait for this to finish. And then when this finishes, kick off 2 new things. But then when those 2 new things kick off, wait for both of them to get done before you run this maybe final thing. So that got really complicated and really hard to read. So the newer versions of JavaScript have something called async and await. And when I started using Sequelize 3 years ago, I almost gave up on it because promises got so complicated that I'm like, I'm writing code that's not going to be maintainable. So what I found out was that I can use async and await because Node runs the latest version of JavaScript. So the latest version of JavaScript has async and await built into it. And basically, I can't use await unless I define the function that is running that code as asynchronous. So basically what I'm doing is I'm telling Node, hey, heads up, there's going to be some asynchronous code happening here. And so if you run into an await, handle that differently. So if I delete async here, you notice that the server crashes immediately and it says await is only valid in an async function. So what I need to do is I need to tell it, hey, instead of just passing in the rec and res like normal, process this code asynchronously. Get ready for an await to come. So I'm going to do my async there, and now all of a sudden my code isn't cranky, and my server fires back up and still crashes. I put you in an await. Oh, did I save it? There we go. Now my server's running. Like that code should be running. So basically now, because we declared this function as asynchronous, we have this beauty to wait. We have this beauteous thing called await. And basically what this is going to do is, let's say I wanted to create 10 different to-do items in the database. I could say to-do.create, and I could do this 5 times. And basically, whenever I hit this endpoint, what Sequelize is going to do for me is it's going to go, oh, you want to create a new to-do. Here's here I have the data. Great. Well, it's going to take a couple seconds to write that into the database. And when it comes back, it's going to say, hey, I'm done. And it's going to return that in what's called a promise. But what if this is a valid thing I may want to do. I may want to create 5 things in the database. So I want to kick all 5 of them off. And then when they come back, all 5 of them come back, I want to say, hey, tell the front end that the creation is done. Because we are not creating 5 different things, I'm going to back out my code and just have it create one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, go kick off the create. And when you kick it off without putting the await code in there, what it's going to do is go, okay, I'm working on creating it, but because you didn't tell me to wait for the creation to be finished, I'm going to just let the server know, send something back to the server and be like, you're good to go. So what we want to do is say, hey, don't tell the front end that you're done saving until you have completely finished creating that new task. So what we're going to do is we're going to put an await in here. And what that's going to do is it's going to go, okay, let me go kick off this create thing. And then it's going to hit the await thing and go, I will pause the code here until I hear back from the sequelized create that it is finished creating. And now, because it is finished, I'm not going to wait on you anymore. What's the next code to run? We can get into promises a little bit more down the road. I could probably do a whole separate YouTube video on like how to kick off several things and wait for all of them to finish at the same time. Little complex to dive into now. And it's something that I would want to do a little prep for before I taught a whole thing on it. But basically we want to do this async because we don't want to tell the front end that we're done creating until sequelize tells us that we have successfully created that task. Okay, so we have our new task endpoint. What are we doing with it? Need to tell the front end to send some data up to it, right? So we're going to go back to our front end. We got the values out. Now we need to tell the front end to send that to the back end. So how are we going to do that?
Say it again.
Now you need
Front end to back end.
Mhm.
Fetch.
I'm going to fetch. And what are we going to fetch?
We have to put
New task.
backslash new task, or forward slash, sorry.
So not just new task. We need to tell it, well,
Path.
we need to tell it the path. I'm wondering just making it. Yeah, so that might work. But it's generally considered best practice to tell them what server you want it to send it to. So I'm going to tell it to send to my local host, and then I'm going to do the new task. I don't think you're wrong. I think that because it is on the same server, you could just say, hey, send it up to new task, figure that out. But normally when you are, I shouldn't say normally, there are often times that you will build your API on a different domain than where you're serving your front end code from. So it's generally considered best practice to write out the whole thing. The writing out the whole thing is called an absolute path. Because it has the whole thing, it's absolutely going to be there, as opposed to a relative path, which is, hey, relative to where I am right now, go execute this thing. All right, what else are we going to do? If only we had written this code before in a different project. Just if only we could reference some other code and stall a little bit more so I can find, oh crap, it's not in this one. New window, open. Where did I put it? I didn't put it in here. It's in like glitch, isn't it? If only we had some method to fetch. That looks good. All right, so we are going to fetch and we are going to use, we're going to tell it what method to use. And our method that we're going to use is post. And then, which is a promise, by the way, we are using promises in fetch. We are then going to get some raw JSON back from the server. And what are we going to do with that raw JSON? We are going to not stringify, we're going to do the reverse of it. We're going to parse it. And so the way that we do that is we return raw JSON dot JSON. And that's just built into the fetch method. Now that we've parsed out our JSON, we are going to then do something with it. Oh, get, receive, save, get. But we want to receive, where's our post? There we go. That's actually what I was looking for. So in order to post something, we need to tell the server, hey, what we're posting up is JSON. And what that's going to do is when we send that up to the server and we say, hey, headers, content type, application, JSON, that's going to let body parser know, oh, I need to do my job here. I need to put that data into rec.body. We also need to tell it, hey, there's some body that we're sending up. And what do we want to send up in that body? Well, we want to send up the name, the due time, and the username. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it in here. Now on the front end, we weren't great. We called name, so we can leave that as. Created at, we don't need to send from the front end, right? The back end's taking care of creating that. The due time, we actually called due date, which is fine. They don't need to match up as long as the handoff matches throughout. And then the username, we did not call username, we just called, oh, I was bad. Okay, name is actually the name of the task. So that could be argued that that is not a great field name, right? Instead of doing name and username, we probably should have done task name or to-do name and username. But we're going to leave it as is now. So what we want to do is our username is actually name on the front end, and then name of the thing on the back end is actually task. I will map all of that through, but I want to make sure that this is working first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to console log fetch worked. And we're going to make sure our server is running, which it is. And I'm going to go to my to-do. I'm going to refresh it. And I'm going to say max. And my task is test. And my due date is tomorrow. I'm going to hit submit. And we get all kinds of errors. And of course, we're getting CORS errors. Instead of going and using 127, I'm going to try and use localhost instead. Oh, no, the problem wasn't that I was using 127001. The problem is I forgot to tell it what port to go on, right? So it's going to my computer and it's like, what server? I'm running 40 different servers on your computer right now. Which server do you want? So I'm going to say 8080. I'm going to refresh here and I'm going to test with a test. I'm going to change the things I'm typing in. So when I look in the database, I know that's going in the right form fields. Let me say the 26. I'm going to hit submit and I still get a CORS error. Pre-flight. I'm going to also change how I'm accessing it in my browser to be the correct server. I'm going to do a name and I'm going to do a task. As long as the place you're making the fetch request to matches the current page you're on, you won't have any CORS issues. So even though localhost and 127.0.0.1 map to the same place, we're running into CORS issues because they're not exactly the same. So I'm hoping now when I hit submit, we get different errors. Yay, different errors. Post to the server, new task, 400 bad requests. Okay, so let's go to our server and open up our terminal a little bit more. And we get unexpected token O in JSON at position 1. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my browser and go to the network tab. And I'm going to open up new task. And it gives me what came back from the server. But I actually want to go to the headers here. I apologize that this is so crammed. And I want to look at the request payload, which is object. Well, that's very specific. Thank you for that. Okay. So I am going to, instead of just sending up the body, fetch is very specific. Fetch is very dumb. Fetch actually wants to send up a string as the body. They aren't good at sending up objects. So we actually have to JSON.stringify here. We have to say, hey, take that object and convert it into, still keep it in JSON format, just make it a string. Okay, so we are going to refresh. We're going to do a name. We're going to do a task. We're going to set the due date as tomorrow. We are going to go back to our console and submit. And we get unexpected end of JSON input 109. Okay, so what's actually happening there is when we told our fetch to happen, we said, hey, take this raw JSON and parse it out because it's going to come back as a string and we want to turn it into an object. And then once that works, say fetch work. Well, if we look at our server isn't sending back JSON. It's actually sending back nothing, sending back an empty. So if we just send back an empty object, now that is sending back JSON. So we're going to clear this. We're going to hit submit again, and we get our fetch worked.
What did you do?
Yeah, go back over.
Yeah, so this res.send looked just like this. So because there was nothing in the parentheses, it was just like, I'll just send back emptiness. I'll send back nothing. Well, nothing isn't valid JSON, but an empty object is valid JSON. So when I put this in here, or a better practice would be something to do like something like message okay, or status okay, or status success, something like that. So doing this will also work. The issue is when we were sending back the empty, when we were sending back nothing, not just the empty object, but nothing, our front end code was like, okay, I'm expecting JSON, parse out the JSON, and it was trying to parse JSON on empty. And it was like, we can't parse empty as JSON. Empty isn't JSON. But as soon as we pass in something to it, the browser goes, oh, okay, no problem. I will make Zoom annoy me. I will pass out, I will parse out some message, and that message we don't actually use. We don't use the data anywhere, but at least we get the fetch working. Okay, so we had to be careful here. We didn't just get the fetch working to the server and back. What did we tell the server to do? Told the server to create a new to-do. Okay, well, let's look. We could get fancy and open the terminal and connect to Postgres through Docker and then write a select statement and see if it's all there. Or we could cheat and use tools to look in pSQL, code to our to-dos. We have our structure here. We checked our structure before, but fingers crossed, if we look at our content, we also have our task and our name and our created at times. So we are actually made it all the way through the stack. We had our front end, we designed it, we used Bootstrap, we have it creating the task, sending it up to the server in the back end The back end is connected to SQLize. It has our models defined. It's using the models that we did define and that connection to send some data in through the Docker container through to Postgres, put that data into Postgres. Postgres sends that back through Docker, back through SQLize. SQLize goes, great, I'm glad that worked. And we're waiting on that to happen because we use the Async Await. It's going to go back to the code. It's going to go, all right, what do you want me to do next? Oh, res.send. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to Express and I'm going to tell the front end, hey, whatever you requested, whatever you asked to do is now done. And now the front end is going to go, all right, now what do you want me to do? Oh, then I want you to parse this JSON out. Now that the JSON is parsed out, what do you want me to do? Console log fetch work. Full stack, guys. You made it full stack.
Oh my God.
So let's look at our to-do list. And our to-do list said connect front end to back end using API calls. Well, we haven't done all the API calls, but you know what? We connected the front end to the back end, so I'm crossing this off the list. We haven't done JavaScript on front end to display and post new items from the server, but you know what? We did post the items to the server, so we're making progress. We got it crossed off. So I'm going to do one more thing, and I'm going to try and stop at 8:15. Okay. And the thing that I want to do is we have our things in the database. I'm not even going to get it to show up in the front end. I just want to make an API call to the back end that's going to retrieve our items from the database and show them in the front end console. Okay, so we'll worry about jQuery and getting them to show up in the browser later. But I want to just make it so I can get some data from the back end and have it show up in my console in the front end. Okay, so in order to do that, I'm going to go to my front end code. I'm going to actually copy this because we're going to reuse most of it. And I'm going to say, I'm going to make a fetch request to tasks. And now you may say, why don't I call that get tasks? Well, that's what I'm using the method for, right? And so really, I wouldn't actually call this new task. I would normally just call that task and then rely on my back end code to say, oh, post request. If it's a post request, that means you want to create a new task here, go run this code, as opposed to, oh, a get request. Oh, you want to run this code instead. So I'm going to call it task as well. And I'm going to make a get request to it. And I'm not going to send any body or headers. I just want to get it. I'm not sending any JSON up. I'm not sending it a body. Okay, then I want to parse out the JSON and I want to get that data and I'm going to console log out that data. That's it, we're done, yay. No, not really. So we did it on the front end, now we have to do it on the back end, right? So we have to do app.get and we have to get task and we need to do an async rec res and we need to make it async because we're doing some things with the database here. So the database is going to be like, oh yeah, if you want to get information, I'm going to get it, but I'm going to return a promise to you. I'm going to promise that that data is going to come back eventually. And if you want to go get more data or run other code, you can totally do that. But we're like, no, we don't want to run any other code. Just wait until that data comes back because I need that before I can go run other parts of my code. So we're going to do an async rec res. We are going to say await. We're actually going to say const tasks, right? So we want to put it somewhere when we get that data back. And we're going to say, hey, wait for this data to come back. What data do you want? We want our models. And again, that's going through the models file that's using what already exists. get our to do, and I want to find all of them. Okay, and I'm going to res.send my tasks. So what we're doing is saying models, SQLize database. SQLize has this thing called find all. Go write the SQL. I hate SQL. I don't want to write the SQL. Just find all of them for me, whatever SQL you want to run to do that, and return it to me in something called tasks. And then once that comes back, use Express to send that back to the front end. So I'm going to save. I'm going to make sure that the server is good to go. I'm going to go to my to-dos. I'm going to refresh. And I'm going to get an error. That was totally planned, and I totally know where that error is happening. It's happening because I have a trailing comma there. No, it's happening because I have an extra curly brace. And okay. I'm going to open my console back up. Not sure why I just closed that. And I am going to refresh, and I get a tasks. And if I look at my array, we don't celebrate yet, guys. We want to make sure things are in there. We're going to burrow in here. Okay, now we can celebrate. We actually see data in there. Okay, so what are the next steps? Getting them to show up in our HTML, right? Because this finished to-do list is something that we hard coded. It's just in our front end to make sure that data is showing up there. So yes, the next task will be getting this data to show up in the front end. Now, one last thing I'm going to say. Where else did we do that? Yeah. We did that in chat room. So that's good to keep in the back of our head. Is tomorrow we can dive back into that code and see what that code did and just copy and paste it into our existing code. One last thing is this helping you guys?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And pacing, we're happy with pacing? Okay. The reason I ask that is just because I wanted to dive into sales, but it's more important that you guys understand how to do this without a framework before we dive into new tooling. We also have all of next week with me as well. So, you know, you guys will want to kill me by then, I'm sure. But we have the data and we made progress today, right? And most importantly, we know where we're starting tomorrow as well, which, by the way, we'll be back at the Tech Garden. So we're making progress. It's also important not to fall behind. So make sure that if you guys have time, try and catch up with this on your own local code. I'm going to do what I did yesterday. I'm going to commit this right now so you have the code in the GitHub repo. But all the backend code except for the code that we wrote today is also commented. And I will ping you guys tomorrow morning in the resources channel and say, hey, code is updated, everything is commented. It is only 8:15. You guys are welcome to leave if you would like to say or ask questions or try and get this up and running in the next 15 minutes. You are totally welcome to. If you want to get out of here, I will not be offended, I promise. So I'm going to commit this code before I stop the live stream. And I'm going to say made endpoints for getting tasks and creating them. Also created front end page using Bootstrap. I'm going to stage those files. I'm going to commit those files. I'm going to pull before I push. I am going to push. GitHub is updated, and I am going to end the stream. Any questions before I end the stream? Anything that you want recorded?